very obviously not a rainy day, but once we get on this sequence of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, rainy day indoor lectures, we have to stay with it, otherwise you really get fouled up in the whole sequence of lectures. And speaking of lectures, those of you who, of course, have had Monday and Tuesday, your notes are in proper sequence. But for those of you who still have this afternoon's lab to take, leave about 2 or 3 pages in your notebook so that you can fill in the rest of that soils lecture and the climatic lecture, the climatic data lecture this afternoon, and then we'll start in with what we're going to do today. So Wednesday students, leave yourself 2 or 3 pages of blank notes. Okay, you're getting a handout here, the single page handout, which is going to discuss the various grape growing areas of California. Now Monday afternoon and Tuesday afternoon and this afternoon we talked about the climatic degree day business. But now we're going to forget that and discuss grape growing areas in California. But before we start that, even though the other deal... Who is it who wants to say something? What's the problem? Yeah. Where are the extra sheets? Is there some back there? 3 or 4 up here, Mark. 5 over here, I guess. There should be enough to go around. I make about 80, and there's only supposed to be 72 students. So somehow we always run out of them. There must be a lot of hideouts in here or something. Okay. So first we want to talk about just a little bit of general background on climate that affects grape growing. And I think we touched on this in 116a, but we'll review it again here and go into a little more detail. Remember that in the very first lecture, the second lecture you had, we talked about how grapes are grown over most of the world. And if they cannot grow vinifera, they'll grow some hybrid of Vitis labrusca or a North American species that can take cold weather better than vinifera. So vinifera, by far, of course, way out in front, the most important species of grape in the world, is a little more particular about its climatic requirements for developing good quality. What it likes to have is just what it gets in California. That is, it likes to have warm, hot, dry summers. Warm, hot, well, warm and hot, dry summers with lots of sunlight in order to develop maximum productivity. We're going to discuss some variations of that in a moment. And this is contrary to labrusca. There's only 1 or 2 students who are interested in labrusca here, but I found out from my own experience in trying to grow them and also seeing them out in the vineyard and also down the valley that labrusca does not tolerate or like our extremely high, bright sunlight and hot, dry summers. And people who've tried to grow it in the Delano area and so on, the vineyards really look horrible because they burn. The leaves actually burn, and they just seem to shrivel up in the heat. But vinifera can take more heat than the American species, but the great important point is that it cannot take as much cold. And those of you who think you're going up to Washington, Oregon and get rich growing grapes, you better remember this. The vinifera can stand temperatures down to about, we can say it varies in sundry things, but the easiest thing for you to remember is 0 degrees Fahrenheit. 0 degrees Fahrenheit for American students and about -20 if you want to put it in centigrade. About -20 centigrade or about 0 degrees Fahrenheit, and this varies up and down 3 or 4 degrees depending upon the variety. We can give you studies, or you can get them showing the winter entry on varieties in Washington, Oregon, and we can give you data on varieties from Europe. But as a rough figure, and this is what I want you to remember, is that vinifera can take it down to about 0 degrees Fahrenheit and about -20 centigrade. Everything else taken under consideration. That is normal cropping, not overcropping, not too late irrigation, etc. So we don't have too much problem in California with winter kill. And somehow this idea doesn't seem to get across sometimes, that we're not talking about winter kill from cold entry in California. We're really talking about spring frost, which is an entirely different matter. So that spring frost, which you got the handout last time, and by the way, a few of you didn't get that handout, so I haven't forgotten. I'm going to make a few copies, but I couldn't find the original this morning. Spring frost, then, is our big problem in California, and this is more or less being taken care of by our sprinkler systems, even though it's expensive at $1,000 an acre to take care of spring frost. We very rarely get fall frost, but sometimes we do in California, which for late varieties such as Emperor, occasionally Cabernet, and Almeria do get hurt a little bit from fall frost. But it's our spring frost that's a big problem. Now we want rain, we want dry summers for vinefera to be perfect. And we have that here, but they don't have that in Europe, of course, and in other parts of the world. And there they have real problems with some of these fungus problems that develop during a wet, warm summer. And of course the biggest problem of all that they have in Europe, and which causes them to have to spray up to 8 or 10 times with Bordeaux mixture or Bordeaux spray, is what we call here, we call it Downy Mildew. Which, by a more technical term, is called peronospora. In downy mildew, we have two mildew problems. We have downy mildew, and we don't have it here, but they have it in Europe. But here our big problem is what we call powdery mildew, or as the Europeans call it, oidium. Or, more technically, well, let's don't give the technical term because we'll discuss that later on in the course. But it's called peronospora for downy mildew. This is the more common term. This is what it's called by the industry in Europe. Here's powdery mildew that we have in California, which is called oidium in Europe. We have only this one here in California. They have both in Mexico. And, or do they have this in Chile? So you only have powdery mildew in there also. But in Mexico, you say, why do they have downy mildew in Mexico? Remember that the monsoon rains, the typhoons and so forth that hit in the Gulf of Mexico bring in a lot of summer rain. What little rain Mexico gets comes in the summertime, unfortunately. So that they do have downy mildew there. They have downy mildew in the eastern U.S., since that's where it originated and went from there to Europe, along with phylloxera and everything else that we've sent to them in a package. So downy mildew is native to the U.S., was taken to Europe, and now it's a big problem over there. Now, it's a summertime fungus, high humidity type of organism. And it has to be controlled, generally speaking, by copper sprays, by copper materials or sprays. The most famous and the longest lasting one is Bordeaux spray, or Bordeaux mixture, excuse me. And this is copper sulfate plus lime. And in the winter textbook, you'll see it written 4-4-100, which means 4 pounds of copper sulfate, 4 pounds of lime, plus 100 gallons of water. 100 gallons of water. So that's the way it's written in the textbook. The textbook makes one other big mistake while we're talking about this. It says that Bordeaux mixture will control downy mildew and powdery mildew. It will not. That's a big error in the text, but you aren't getting around to that reading assignment yet. But Bordeaux mixture will not control powdery mildew. The big control for powdery mildew, as most anybody who grows grapes in California knows, is sulfur dust. Why is it such a big problem here, and downy mildew a big problem in Europe? Downy mildew is, as I say, a high humidity, rainfall type of organism. Powdery mildew likes low humidity. It grows well in our hot, dry climate of California. So that we have that big problem with the vinifera grapes in the state. Okay, we want rain during the don't want any rain during the summertime. We'd prefer it in the dormant season, and we get it here, usually. But sometimes we get a few late showers in California, especially in the northern part here of Sacramento Valley and the Lodi area. And this can foster or encourage some of the fungus problems we have. The most important one is dead arm disease. And that's all I'm going to say now, just call it dead arm. We won't go into that. But it is a fungus problem that really thrives in a cool, wet, early spring. And the farther south you go in California, of course, the less of it you get because you get less spring rains as you go south. Okay, now, once again, talking about where we grow grapes in the world. Remember, we grow them from the farthest north place where we grow them, vinifera at least, is northern Germany. And this is about 51 degrees north. And then we grow them, the farthest south we grow them is in New Zealand, which is about, where is it? My note? It's 40. That's one of the odd things. New Zealand is about 40 degrees south, and Germany is about 50 degrees north. And we grow grapes more or less over those extremes. But the vinifera does not do well, no matter what they tell you, unless it has a dormant season. And you get dormant seasons in different ways. You get dormant seasons in India and those areas by the rainfall season. The grapes go dormant when they run out of water. And then when the monsoon seasons begin again, the grapes grow again. So you can get the dormant season forced by drought. Or if you want to grow grapes plus or minus 10 degrees from the equator, let's say, you can grow them if you grow them at high elevations, of course. In Colombia, Venezuela, and some of those places where you have 5,000 feet or more elevation, then you can get a cool enough period to cause some dormancy. Now, you can grow grapes in those areas without dormancy, but they will go downhill, poke, little by little, until they wear out because they don't get a chance to rest. So when I say you can't grow grapes in those areas, I don't mean that you can't grow them at all. It's just that it's not a continuous, not a long-term proposition, unless you have high elevation to give you some coolness. Okay, that's the world situation. Let's go to California. And in California, we're going to talk about now geographical areas. The thing that I harped on Monday and Tuesday and this afternoon is these temperature regions of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. That is completely separate from what we're going to talk about now. We're going to talk about geographical areas. And most of you know these pretty well if you're Californians or if you've worked on, or if you're a major in the department. It's in the textbook, but let's take a look at a few slides. Where's Dr. Two? Can you catch them? They won't, they aren't that heavy. They won't throw. Let's take a real quick review of what we're talking about, and then we'll go back and discuss it in detail. Put that light. This is one of the bad things about this room is the light coming in the morning sun coming in through those things. Now, you've got a picture of this, I think, in the text, but one of the things I want to point out to those of you who are not really familiar with grape growing and north and south areas in California, when we're talking about climate, is that the climate effect on grape growing in California doesn't make any difference whether you're down here at Bakersfield or up here at Marysville. What makes a difference is how far you are from the bay. Because, as you know, during the daytime, this whole sink here heats up, the hot air rises. In the evening, the cool air comes in through the bay and cools it off, and it flows this way and it flows that way. That's why we have a citrus growing area up here, and we have a citrus growing area down here. The actual daytime maximums and so forth, the temperature aren't much different from here than they are from here. But just compare that to the eastern U.S., which I've drawn in here. Here's the equivalent of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Here's Richmond, Virginia. And here's North Carolina. Now, when you think about growing grapes in the east, you think about, boy, how cold it is up north and how warm it is down south. But in California, it doesn't make a bit of difference during that whole stretch from north and south, because we have the temperatures controlled by what happens through here. That's why low dye is what we call air conditioned, and I told you about that last time, because it comes in here, you get that afternoon cooling breeze that comes in, and then it flows this way and flows that way. And it heats up in the daytime, moves up, makes a vacuum so that the cool air comes in again the next night. Okay, so much for that. Okay, next slide. Now, this is what we're going to talk about when I get through with all this preliminary. These are the grape growing areas of California. We're going to talk about the North Coast, the San Joaquin Valley, the Sacramento Valley, the South Coast, and the desert. This is around the Salton Sea at Coachella Valley. Coachella Valley, or the desert area, the South Coast, which now has to move up to include part of this area, because I'm not sure where we're putting Santa Barbara now. Are we putting in North Coast or South Coast? Dr. Cleaver, do you know? Anyway, we got quite a grape development going on here in Santa Barbara County, and I don't know. Well, yeah, that has to bring in a new one. And really, I guess we're going to have to bring in a new one because we've got so much grape development going along here in this coastal area. Salinas Valley, which I'll show you here in another slide in a moment, moves right down through here. The winds come whistling in like this, hit that slot, go right up the valley and cool it off. So Sacramento, North Coast, the upper or intermediate valley, this is going to really be broken into two. We're going to call it the Intermediate Valley and the San Joaquin Valley, and actually cover 6 areas in the discussion. Okay, next slide. Now, this is just to give you, some of you have seen this map brought in the classroom. We have it in 3 dimensions, but I just wanted to show you once again the great San Joaquin Valley lying here, completely open and level. This is the breadbasket of the United States. I sometimes tell people that one of these days we're going to have a fantastic earthquake, which is going to drop all of California into the ocean, and then we're going to have a shoreline along here, and then the people of the United States are going to suffer. Okay? Because, not counting us. Okay, here's the bay, and here's the area, and here's the Salinas Valley, see? Can you see? The Salinas Valley coming in here, and that's a big new developmental area of the state. The Salinas Valley here, with some grape growing, developing quite a grape growing business going on in this area near Santa Barbara. They call it, this is Santa Barbara down here, but it's this point in here and these valleys that lie in here that part of the Big Dune development. Santa Maria, really more Santa Maria. Yeah, we can't see that. It says Santa Barbara, Santa Maria. It's in this area here where you have these little valleys. And part of that's because they built 1 or 2 new dams in that area to provide water, or makes possible to grow it, plus the fact that it does now have, with the water supply and the cool area, it's quite a development area. Here's the desert area. Here's the Salton Sea, and Coachella Valley is the area just north of it. Where most of the grapes in that area are grown. There's only 10,000 acres in that whole area, so that 10,000 out of 600,000 isn't very much, except that that's our extremely important early table grape area, which once again I'll cover in detail here in a moment. I just want to give you an overview first. This is the South Coast area then. This is San Bernardino area out here, Cucamonga and so forth, where they do have some grapes growing under the smog and between the subdivisions. So that's the deal there. Here's the Sonoma Valley, moving up through here, and here's Napa Valley, this little sliver right through here. And then, of course, this is over in the Livermore area, where Wendy Brothers, Concana, and so forth are located. So these valleys, two up above this area, and this area here are real premium quality grape growing areas. Okay, while we got the slide, it sort of throws it out of context, but let's see the next slide, and then we'll get that out of the way. One of the reasons that we have cool weather in the North Coast area for grape growing are the summertime fogs. And some of you have seen this scene when you're driving to San Francisco. I stopped down near Vacaville one August day when the sun was shining bright and it was hot as could be over here, and took a shot at this fog bank that was lying over the Napa Valley. This was just creeping over, just creeps over the hills a little bit toward Vacaville, but you see it's this fog bank that comes in during the summer times that keeps our coastal areas cool. So I just wanted to show you that before we go on with the lecture, because some people wonder about this fog belt. Have any of you ever figured out why we have summertime fog and not wintertime fog? Okay, let's have the lights, please. We have summertime fog because of this Japanese current that sweeps up around Alaska and down the coast. And it's cold. And then you have the prevailing warm winds that come off of the Pacific from Hawaii in that area that are heavily laden with moisture. And when they hit this area over this cold Japanese current, it condenses. And that's when you get the fog. And then in the wintertime, of course, the temperature's all more or less uniform, so you don't get the fogs in October and November. If you want to go to the beach in Northern California, you go in October or November. Okay, so much for that. All right, now we want to talk about each of these districts in particular. And we might as well start from the north, because that's what's on your list here. And the list that you've got showing the acreage of these various counties, I apologize because it's a year old. And the way grape growing is changing in California, it'll change before we go to bed tonight because it's just changing crazy. But it's pretty hard to get all this data together, sort it out, and so on. So I figure 1 year old isn't too bad. So we're talking about the North Coast. You just saw a slide of the effect of the North Coast. This North Coast, of course, goes clear up above Ukiah. Now, for foreign students, some of this you're not going to have to. I was saying it doesn't mean a lot to you, so just get the ideas, okay? But some of the class would like to know some of these terms. We go from Mendocino County up where Ukiah is located, and would go down and include Monterey and Santa Cruz and even San Luis Obispo counties. So I guess we have to call that Santa Maria area, North Coast area. In this general area, the temperatures are relatively, and the word is relatively low. They're fairly uniform because you're close to the ocean, and if you don't get breezes, you get fog or you get both. So the summer times are relatively cool. One of the things that about Berkeley, for example, is a good place to study and go to school is that the summertime temperature doesn't differ from the wintertime temperature more than an average of 5 degrees. so that you don't go to sleep in the classrooms when it goes up to 105, because it doesn't get up to 105. So it's a pretty good place to go to school. But this is typical of most of the North Coast. Summer fogs, the breezes coming in up that Salinas Valley. Sometimes those breezes really blow. They blow so hard that it causes problems with irrigation. Dr. Leiter is sure that it's going to cause more and more problems with fruit set in the spring and so on. But at least it's cool. And this is where we get our high-quality dinner wine grapes grown in California, in the so-called North Coast area. We have a relatively high rainfall. It goes from 40 inches at the northern part down to, well, we used to say 15 inches at Salinas, but now we've moved down to King City and so forth, so we have about 10 inches. So we go from about 40 inches in the north to about 10 inches in the south. Most of it used to be non-irrigated, but all the new grapes that are going in, because land is so expensive, grape prices are so high that if there's water available in any way at all, most growers are saying, forget the cost and let's go for irrigation. Partly because you need sprinklers to prevent frost, so you might as well, if you have water supply at all, take care, at least giving the grapes one irrigation. We'll talk about irrigation later on, but I'll just say now that anywhere in the North Coast where you can give the grape, your vineyard, at least one 4-inch irrigation in the summertime, it pays off terrifically. Even on fairly deep soil, if you can give them one irrigation in the summer. Without irrigation in this North Coast area, the yields are, to some of you, may sound fantastically low. They average about 3 tons per acre. On non-irrigated vineyards, the average is about 3 tons per acre. And this is why grape growing didn't used to be such a profitable business in the North Coast, because at $100 to $150 a ton, 3 tons to the acre doesn't make you rich overnight. But now that, of course, that it's up to anywhere from $400 to $800 a ton, even the non-irrigated vineyards are profitable. Okay, you have the list here showing you something about the production of this area. And I'm not going to hold you for great detail on this, but let's just look at a few things here. Look at, going down that North Coast list. All of you got the handout now? Look at Monterey County, just to give you an idea how things have changed. Monterey County, in the first column, has 1,924 bearing acres. But look over in the last column, and it's jumped up to nearly 12,000. That's Salinas Valley. And I say that was a year ago. Now it's probably over 20,000. We always talk about Napa Valley as being the great home of wine grapes in California, but they only have 13,000 acres in production, bearing, and they moved up to a little over 16,000 out of 600,000 acres in California. So Napa Valley is not so big as it is high in quality, or at least which they try to keep it that way. Look at Santa Barbara County. I mentioned that, pointed out to you on the map. Santa Barbara County has only 120 acres. That means that that means vines that were in existence 5 years ago. When we say bearing, we're talking about vines that had to be planted or were there 5 years ago. 120 acres 5 years ago. Today it's over 2,000. Quite a jump, and it's jumping more this year. You see the difference between what we're looking at here for the 72 and what was in existence a year ago in 73, statewide is 50,000 acres. Because as an average figure in your mind, you can figure that grape growing has increased in California, well, not 50, let's say 40,000 acres a year for the last 3 years. 40,000 acres per year the last 3 years. And it'll probably go up at least 30,000 this year. I think it's tapering off a little bit because they're running out of land. Okay, so you have to, in your mind, add some percentage points to these figures that you're looking at. So this North Coast now, in 72, added up to 67,000 acres, which is a little bit more than 10% of our total in the state. So it isn't so important in terms of mass, quantity, and tonnage, because the acreage is only, say, a little more than 10% of the total, and the yield per acre is well below the state average of 7 tons. Even with the amount of new vineyards that have gone in with irrigation, the average production in that area is less than half the state average. It's the cool climate, the high-quality dinner wine varieties that can be grown in that area because of it that makes it important.
What would be the difference in your tons per acre in an irrigated vineyard in the North Coast? You mentioned 3 tons per acre.
Yeah. Okay. If you get 3 tons per acre non-irrigated, and well, I don't know. I don't have data between irrigated and non-irrigated plots because we don't have any data, except that we do have situations where they've received 1 irrigation, something like this, or years in which we've had extra heavy and late rainfall. And where we've had that at Oakville, for example, we've increased the production by at least 1 ton per acre. So if you can give them 1 irrigation only, you ought to jump this 1 ton per acre on anything approaching a decent soil. So 1 ton per acre at $500 a ton is worth thinking about. Okay. Now we move to this South Coast region. Remember, that's the San Bernardino, Cucamonga, etc. area. In this area you're looking at here, Los Angeles, these are counties, by the way, you're looking at here. And you see that the big area on the so-called South Coast is San Bernardino. And this area is not as cool as the North Coast. You don't have as much fog. You don't have as much cool breezes, but you're still in the ballpark compared to living at Bakersfield. And you have less rainfall, and therefore, if you're going to get any production at all, you've got to have some irrigation. It's a hotter temperature. So, and with less fog and less cool wind, you're going to have higher water requirements. And in this area, in general, the product that is made is what we refer to as standard wines. It's not cool enough for these high-quality premium wines, but they do make, their big point is that they make standard table wines in this area. But they also put increasing emphasis now, because it's a little bit warmer, on dessert wines. Wines such as sherry and port and muscatel, and one of our own California's particulars, Angelica wines. High sugar requiring grape varieties because of the higher temperatures. But you see, this only has 13,000 acres in 72, and instead of, well, I guess that acreage might be holding fairly constant, because there are some new areas going in that area, in the Escondido area, and what we call Lake Elsinore area. There's quite a big push and enterprise to plant additional acreage of grapes there. But in general, in this South Coast area, because of the population push, because of the value of the land for industry, and perhaps as much as anything else, the smog problem is making grape growing less important in Southern California. Now we're talking about, now when I say South Coast, we're not talking yet about Coachella Valley in that area. We're just talking about that, what really amounts to, I started to say LA County, but LA doesn't have much in that area. It's San Bernardino County, basically. Okay, now then we move to, I don't know why I put Sacramento Valley in next, except that it's close to home. And you see we have here 2,800 acres. Some of this is increasing pretty rapidly. Look at Sacramento County, where we've gone from 100 acres, 108 acres, up to 1,400. Well, 1,400 is not enough to get excited about, but in terms of a percentage increase, it's a terrific increase. So that there is some interest in this in the Sacramento Valley, particularly in the foothills. That's where you find this. You say, well, where are all these grapes? Yolo has 477. Where are they? Well, 77 of them are out here in our vineyard. So, so they're scattered around, but much of it is in the foothills over on the east side, just in the low foothills, say 2,000, 3,000 feet high, or elevation. But there is quite a bit of activity in grape planting in that area. Now, there's very practically no grapes grown on the west side of Sacramento Valley, mainly because it's too hot over here, and I don't know why. It should be much hotter on the west side than on the east side, but I guess it's the lack of elevation, of course. But now in this Sacramento Valley, which we're talking about now, that goes clear up to Yuba County, clear up to the what's the big dam? Up to Shasta Dam, clear up to that area. We have in this area then, we're talking about Sacramento Valley then, from Shasta Dam to the city of Sacramento. That's what we refer to then as Sacramento Valley. We have we have this terrific rainfall difference from as high as 40 inches in the north to about an average over a great period of time of about 16 inches at Davis. 40 inches down to 16. We have the extreme temperatures. Remember I showed you the slide and said that it doesn't depend on how far north or south you are, it's how far you are from the Golden Gate. And as you move up northward in the Sacramento Valley, you're going to go into hotter and hotter temperatures, up to 110, so on. And there's of course, no cool breezes and no summer fogs. And you have one other problem, which those of you who've been here for a year or two as students know about, is we have these extreme, dry, hot north winds that sometimes blow here, for 2 or 3 days. And this can be very bad of course, you can't grow table fruit. Table fruit is not a very good crop to grow in this area because this wind scars the fruit and beats it up, so that you're out of business for real competition on growing table fruit. For wine grapes, you could grow wine grapes, except that it's a region 5, a hot area, so you're not going to get quality. And furthermore, you have problems with the wind during the summer, and you have problems with early fall rains. And unless you have a rain-resistant variety, you're going to be in trouble if you get rained on. But one of the things that you must remember, I cannot, even though we're short on time, cannot avoid throwing in a few comments every now and then. Remember your midterm question about where Thompson seedless came in. It came in up in this area in the Sacramento Valley to Yuba City, about 100 miles north of here was where Thompson seedless was brought in. Because in those days, right after World War I, this whole area of Sutter and Yuba counties, starting in 50 miles or so north of here, was a real grape growing center, especially for table grapes and, more importantly, for raisins. This was the raisin bowl. Now it's the peach bowl. But in those days, it was a place where they grew raisins. And much of them were muscats, and they used the prune dryers and so forth to dry them. Yes? No, World War I. Mm-hmm.
Wasn't that for the first?
No, but no, I didn't say that. I said that right after World War I, this was the big grape-growing area, even though the Thompson seedless were brought in 20 years earlier, so I see your point, okay. But as I say, this whole area then, all the way from Yuba City, even down to Davis, was a big raisin grape-growing area in those days after World War I, back around 1920, 1930. When you go out to the vineyard and we turn to go south to the vineyard, you can look across the street and see an old pile of old ruins of a reservoir. And that was a reservoir, according to Dr. Winker, that was set up there to irrigate 400 acres of raisin muscats that were grown right up there in those days. 400 acres of raisin muscats. Okay, what caused the raisin industry to move south? Of course, when they opened up the San Joaquin Valley, found out they could sun-dry raisins instead of putting them in a dehydrator. Of course, that wiped the people out of business. You can't afford to spend money to dry them mechanically when your competitor can dry them in the sun. And you couldn't dry them in the sun up around Yuba City because you got early fall rains. because the rain comes earlier the farther north you go in California. So that this wiped out the raisin business in that area, and they went to peaches. So, okay, so much for history on that. Okay, if some of these new varieties that Dr. Olmo is introducing turn out to be as good as the predictions for wine, that is for growing a fairly good dinner wine in hot areas, this area of Sacramento Valley has some real potential because we do have the best water supply, and there's lots of good soil, and as land prices in California go, it's probably still the best buy on land. But keep in mind the comment I made. If these varieties turn out to be as good as they're predicted, and if the wine market continues to grow. And that's what your second handout was today, was to warn you a little bit about that. Okay, so much for Sacramento Valley. We go to the San Joaquin Valley. And the San Joaquin Valley, of course, as all of you know by now, is the grape growing area of the United States. Just to shock you a little bit, 1/3 of all the grapes produced in the United States are produced in Fresno County. 1/3 of all the grapes produced in the United States are produced in Fresno County. In this area we have something like, well, you can see here that we have 380,000 acres. This is the heart of the table grape industry and of the raisin industry. In the San Joaquin Valley, as you've heard me say before, we produce more than 1/3 of the world's raisins, And in addition to that, we produce almost a million tons for wine, and we produce about 300,000 tons of table grapes. About 300,000 tons of table grapes produced in the San Joaquin Valley, 1/3 of the world's raisins, and over 1 million tons of grapes for winery. Remember, no matter what we say about wine varieties, the leading wine variety in California is still Thompson seedless, unfortunately. So, as in this area, we have low rainfall, of course. I opened this discussion by saying that we want no rain in the summertime, and we get none there. And the rainfall varies from about 10 inches at Madera to less than 6 inches at Bakersfield. So that obviously everything has to be irrigated. Again, we have the same high temperatures that we have in the Sacramento Valley, but we don't have quite those strong winds, and we don't have the early fall rains. And that makes it the raisin capital. The table grapes grown in this area, of course, are the ones that you know so well, are Thompson seedless, Riviere, Red Malaga, and Emperor, so are the ones. And in this area we have perhaps, no we don't, I started to say the highest production per acre, but that comes elsewhere, that comes in the intermediate valley. But because we have so much Thompson seedless in that area, it is a very high producing area per acre, on a per acre basis. Okay, then we go to the intermediate valley, which we have down here that goes, see, the Sacramento Valley stops at Sacramento. Okay, the intermediate valley begins at Sacramento and goes down to Modesto, or Modesto-Merced area. And looking at your last set of data here that I handed out, you can see that in this area we have around 73,000, probably 75,000 or more by now, acres of grapes. There we really do have the highest production per acre. Mainly because of, well, for several reasons. We have a lot of Carignan, which is high producing. We have Grenache, high producing. We have Zinfandel, a pretty high producer. And we have Tokay, which is one of the highest producing of all. So we have a lot of those high producing varieties. Some of you look puzzled. There's Tokay, Grenache, Zinfandel, Carignan, and I've got Tokay, and then of course in that region you do have quite a bit of Thompson seedless. Those are the important varieties in that area, and they're all heavy producers, and we have good soils. And we get that breeze through the Golden Gate. That's why I said it's air conditioned. You're opposite the gate and the Bay Bridge, and opposite the gate, and then the air goes either way, so that Lodi is just ideally suited for Tokay. It's not cool enough to give you this high quality, or this, since this is on TV, I better say it will not give you the premium quality, but it will give you good quality. Some of you don't know the background, but a lot of people in that area are really fighting tooth and toenail over where we're going to break the limits on whether it's a heat region 4 or a heat region 3 or heat region 5. And it actually gets down to where it's a heat region on one side of the one of those rivers there, and a different heat region on the other side. And it makes a big difference in the price of the grapes as to which heat region you're in. The Wednesday afternoon I hadn't heard the heat region discussion yet, so I'll touch on that again later. But anyway, it's an ideal area then for at least the Tokay table grape. We don't get any strong winds there, but by the time they leave Davis and get to Lodi, they've tapered off a little bit. But we get about 20 inches of rain in the Lodi area, and no summer fogs. And with these high-producing varieties, and with a great amount of good soil that's located from Lodi to Modesto, we do have here the highest production per acre with these varieties and with the soil of the state, just slightly under 8 tons per acre. Or for the foreign students, that's 20 tons per hectare, which is pretty good when you consider some of the yields that you read about in the world. In this area, this intermediate area, whether you believe it or not, is probably our highest wine-producing area. Certainly among the medium quality, standard plus medium quality wines. And again, we ship out of here. I tell you, that's one of the things I don't like about this room. We ship out of here, of Tokay alone, we used to ship over 50,000 tons of Tokay fruit was shipped as table grapes. Okay, now that covers everything. Just one more minute. You don't have your second page of this because there's only one figure on it, and we didn't run it off. But then we get to the desert region, in which, just give me time to give you just a comment on it so we can wipe this out. We have 10,000 acres in Coachella Valley. Very little of it is in Imperial Valley. Imperial Valley, see, we have the big valley like this, and we have the Salton Sea sitting here like this. It's the other way around. Anyway, this part here is the Imperial Valley, and this is the Coachella Valley. This is Coachella Valley. Palm Springs sits over here. Indio sits about here. And this area in here has probably about more than 9,000 acres of grapes. And in the Imperial Valley, if there's anything, it's probably less than 1,000, which would be south of the Salton Sea. And there's just room along here, a narrow strip, so that there's a highway and so forth to get you to the Imperial Valley. We used to have Borrego Valley over here, where there used to be about 500 acres of grapes, but that's practically gone out of business now. So we have about 10,000 acres here of extremely early grapes, such as Perlet. That's the only really place where you can grow Perlet profitably. We have Thompson Seedless, and we have Cardinal. The 3 early varieties are grown in this area. And it's only important for early table grapes. But since those are the earliest table grapes in California, and sometimes bring as much as 40 or 50 cents a pound wholesale, it is an important area for table grapes. 10,000 acres there. So that what you need to put at the bottom of the sheet then is put down 10,000 acres in the desert area. And that gives you a total in 1972 of about 550,000 acres. But we know that last year the total is now, at the end of 73, the statewide total is slightly over 600,000 acres as of the end of 1973. Okay, so now you've had a once-over lightly of where they grow grapes in California and why. You should remember the important product in each area and the relative importance of the areas, and a dollar value basis, as well as an acreage basis. The acreage basis is not so important, but the dollar value basis is what's important. So that when you talk about North Coast having only 10% of the acreage, they're probably worth 20% of the dollars because of the higher price per ton. You see, Thompson seedless sell, I don't know, let's say for $50 or $60 a ton, whereas our North Coast grapes sell for $700, $800 a ton. So it isn't strictly a matter of acreage. But what's the important product in each place? Dry table wine in the North Coast, dessert, sweet wines, high alcohol type wines in the South Coast and in the San Joaquin Valley, raisins and table grapes and so on. Those that I want you to have some idea of the relative importance and why for each of these areas. Okay?